Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, insight, skills, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. On today's show, I chat with Sarah Li Cain. Sarah is a money storyteller who believes that loving money should be everyone's priority. Not only does she believe that it will help with stress levels, but she believes that loving money will motivate and encourage you to improve your own financial situation. As you know, we talk about money a lot around these parts, and that's because I've found that it can be a huge obstacle for a lot of lawyers on their search for happiness. I also think there's still a stigma around the idea of loving money, so I invited Sarah on to chat about just that. On today's show, we chat about loving your money and on how being more authentic can bring more money into your life. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. Sarah, I am so glad you could join me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's jump right into it. What do you mean when you say it's important to love your money?
Okay, so I believe that money isn't just, dollars and cents. It's actually, tied to who you are, your values, and that could mean physical health, mental health, and spiritual health as well. And so to love your money like you mean it is really to incorporate all of those things and to basically say, I'm enough. And, the money's there to help me be more enough than I am.
And do you think that most people love their money?
I would say half. I think if everybody loved their money, we wouldn't. Actually, number one, we wouldn't be talking about it. And number two, there wouldn't be that many books out there and products out there, blogs out there that talk about it.
So I guess there's a lot of struggle for what you think of as at least half of the population. And so where do they start? What advice would you give them if they're trying to improve this relationship that they have with their money?
So what's worked really well for me and everybody I know around me is the idea of forgiveness. And I think, speaking about debt, for example, so I was in debt 10 years ago, and there's a lot of people I know around me that are in a lot of debt. And so they, feel really terrible about it. When I was in debt, I felt absolutely terrible about it, especially how I actually accumulated it. And so it was a lot of negative self-talk. There's that whole idea of a negative stigma around debt and, being angry or hanging off and things like that. But I believe that if you just, kind of stop and say, you know what, I made those decisions because it reflected a point in my life where I thought it would make me happy. And I can let go of that. Now I'm paying the debt off. I can say, hey, I'm taking a step in the right direction. Or if you're not in debt, whatever you're doing right now, maybe you're in a job that you hate. Maybe you, went on a shopping spree last week and regretted every single purchase. Those things are okay because we're human. We make mistakes. And, forgiveness is a really huge part of just accepting the fact that we're human and things happen.
So it's really interesting because I know a lot of law school students have, upwards of $100,000, $200,000, some even $300,000 of debt and feel almost like they have to live. I guess there's two camps. They're the ones who almost won't live their lives because they're so beholden to this debt and to paying off the debt. Like they're just almost punishing themselves through their debt repayment plan. And then they're the ones who are almost bury their head in the sand and don't want to think about it. And they live this extravagant lifestyle with this idea that they're never going to pay it off anyway. They'll make the minimum payments and take it to their grave. Where do you fall and how do you think people should think about their debt repayment plan?
Well, that's a really good question. I have a lot to say about that. So where I fell into it, I was actually in denial. So long story short, 10 years ago, I lived in Australia and my ex-boyfriend had moved to Australia to be with me. And so I ended up pretty much taking care of him. And so my debt was as a result of paying groceries and gas and all that stuff. We went on trips and I paid for all that. So I had not looked at my credit card statement at all during that time because deep down I knew that I shouldn't really be paying for this. And it was, just not a good situation. And I didn't really look at the debt until I actually moved back from Australia and then saw the credit card statement. And then I realized, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? So I was in denial in that way. Right. And then the second part for me was paying it back. I felt chained to the debt as well. There's this resentment and anger over it. And, for me, it took a long time for me to realize that the debt wasn't there to, like, as a bad guy, if you want to just make an analogy or sort of metaphor with it, it was really there to remind me that, to say, hey, Sarah, maybe the choices you're making aren't making you happy and they're not, the best things for you. And, it was because of that debt that I really turned my life around, right? I just had really low self-esteem way back then. I really was a doormat to a lot of people, even though, I was confident in a lot of respects, but letting people take advantage of me, that part I was just really terrible at. And so after the debt and realizing that I accumulated the debt as a result of me just being a doormat to my ex-boyfriend, to be very blunt about it, I really started to make those changes where I started saying no to a lot of things or created a lot more boundaries around my time and, around my money. And I became debt-free after that. And I have been debt-free for almost 7 years as a result. And, so going back to the whole idea of debt, don't view it as something that's, not a part of you. View it as a choice that you made and you're choosing to pay off the debt or you're choosing to be in denial or whatever it is, right? Because if you're going to be continually angry with it, if you're going to continue feeling like you're out of control, then you're never going to be able to, I don't want to say reclaim your life, but you're never going to be able to say, hey, this is my life. I want to make it happy. I have a responsibility to myself to be happy, and kind of all that stuff. And we can go into that if you want. So.
Well, I mean, you said the magic word, which is happy, and I love anything that has to do with increasing happiness. But before we move on to that, I was so fascinated in the way you just put that, because I had never really thought about it that way, as far as the unhappiness about the debt really stemming from the place in which you made the decision to take on the debt. Because I do feel like even though I went to law school intentionally, there wasn't a lot of intentionality around my decision to take on $250,000 in debt. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had this negative self-talk, because prior to law school, I was great with money. I was a saver. I bought things, like bought my cars in cash. I was like very money conscious. I've always been very money conscious. And for some reason, law school felt bigger or more important than me. Do you know what I mean? And because everybody else was doing it, I let myself just go with the flow and go with the crowd. And then when I came out with the debt, really blamed myself for not sticking to my guns and being the person that I always was with money in that circumstance. So it's really interesting that you brought up that point, and I think it's really poignant and actually resonates for me quite a bit, even though our circumstances were so different. And people would say that investing in an Ivy League legal career is quote unquote good debt, but it didn't feel like good debt. It never felt like good debt,
I think, we can talk about debt or whatever, but ultimately whatever you choose to spend your money on or not to spend your money on is, it has to feel good, right? Mm-hmm. And it has to feel, I mean, I do something called gut check. It sounds really weird, but I just like, whenever I do a purchase now, I kind of like, I don't want to say look deep inside, but I just kind of like give myself a minute, like, okay, is this purchase feel right to me? Like, is this something that's going to be good? And usually when I listen to that, I never regret the purchase. And when I ignore it completely, I completely regret the purchase. And so, if you're talking about like getting into student loan debt or whatever, it doesn't matter if it's good debt or bad debt. Just, really just kind of think, okay, am I willing to, go into $250,000 of debt for this career or whatever that I'm going to do? And if yes, great. And, when it comes time to paying it back, just go back, simply if you can go back to that point where you made the decision and say, you know what, I really checked with myself and I'm going to accept that responsibility where, I was willing to do this. And so keep that feeling with you. I think that will really take you really far with the idea of spending and saving money.
Definitely feel that aligns really well with kind of my message and the message that I'm always advocating for on the show, which is when you do things with intention and with kind of your personal values, it feels better. And so the results, no matter whether they end up being good or bad, it's easier to take on the results and manage them if you acted in a way that you can be proud of.
Exactly. And, for me, when I got into that consumer debt, it was a tough time, and because it was kind of it kind of all boiled around that tough relationship I had and my insecurities and all that. And so, and I realized, very quickly that when I spent not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to, those were the items on my credit card statement that I was angry about the most.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really funny because it shouldn't have taken me as long to pay off that money. I mean, it was $9,000 in the grand scheme of things. It's not a lot of money, right? But it took me a long time to pay that off because I was so resentful towards the whole situation. And then, the minute I turned it around, I was like, you know what? No, there were some fun things that I paid with my credit card. And I just focused on that. So every time I would pay it off, whatever amount I paid off, I would just say, hey, I went on this trip, or hey, I met a really cool friend because I decided to book this tour in Australia, whatever. And that really helped, and that really shifted my mindset to putting the responsibility back onto me. These are my decisions I made, whether or not I did it with intention or not. I'm going to accept that responsibility and move on with it.
Ooh, I like that you said that because I actually started a money mantra around how I spend money because I also was feeling a lot of anxiety around paying off my debt and was really excited to pay it off, but it was going so slowly and I was starting to feel really stressed by that and had this whole scarcity mindset around money and began tracking my money so closely that it almost wasn't fun anymore. And then I realized that came from this fear that there wasn't going to be enough money, that I needed to pay off all my debt really quickly before I lost my job, before the money stopped coming in. And so I've started saying, not out loud, but in my head and thinking whenever I spend a large chunk of money, there's more where that came from. And it just reminds me that I am an able-bodied, hardworking person who's able to generate more money. And I don't have to be so worried all the time. Like, never in my life have I had actual problems generating money. So it's a fear that's not founded in anything. And coming from that place, I'm able to be more realistic. So like my student loans were refinanced at a lower interest rate. Mm-hmm. And now I feel much better about not like throwing money at it because I'm not terrified that I won't be able to make the payments for the next 10 years. It's not going to take 10 years, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. Before I was just like throwing money at everything because I was just so nervous. And now there's a little bit more intention and I feel better about the way I'm spending my money. So I love that you said, can't even remember what you said. That was so good now. I got so excited and like so off track. But it's really interesting how just shifting your mindset about the money. Oh, you were talking about how thinking about the way the money was spent previously put the onus back on you and made it feel a little bit better. And these little shifts, what a difference they make in how you feel about the money that you have to spend, right? Like you have to pay back the loan. So
for me, it was, I don't know how many years ago this was, but it was a big light bulb moment where I remember feeling like I had to, again, do this or spend that, whatever. And then I realized like, hey, no, like this is my money. Like I can do whatever the heck I want with it. Like if I don't want to pay back this loan, I don't have to pay back the loan. I mean, I have to suffer the consequences of that. But, I mean, if I want to buy this, cool coffee mug, that's totally cool. If I get into debt over it, that's, it's on me. And so thinking about it that way it just really blew my mind. It's just a simple concept, the idea that you're responsible for your money and responsible for yourself and the decisions that you make with it. But once you really practice that, it's an idea of tracking your spending, for example. So let's say, you are a shopaholic or you overspend on whatever, right? The mere fact that you're tracking your spending means that you're taking responsibility over like figuring out what it is that you're spending money on. And that act, right, itself can help you stop spending money. Whereas, let's say you're really resentful towards, I don't know, like I had this a few years ago where I felt like I had to buy gifts for everybody for Christmas. And once I said, I didn't say it as politely as I said it now, but I said, screw this. I'm not going to buy presents because somebody else bought me a present. And I remember, like, it wasn't the end of the world. Nobody was mad, or anything like that. And I was fine. So again, shifting that responsibility to say, this is what I want to do. And I'm going to, enforce it because, this is why, whatever, it can make you happy. You might end up spending more money as well or less, whatever. But, as long as you're, at peace with your decision, whatever it is, then, you're going to live a much happier life.
Absolutely. There's definitely studies to show that being reactive and kind of passive in your life choices leads to lower levels of happiness. And even the shift in just the way you think about it. So instead of saying I'm paying down debt, I now say I'm investing in my education because the investment already happened, but that's what it was. And
I like that. Yeah.
So I have like a Google reminder of whenever it pays that, yay, I invested another $1,000 in my education today,
Yeah, no, that's...
Boo, I lost another $1,000 to something that I stopped doing 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm sure you may have talked about this as well. I don't know if you read Kate Northrop's Love and Money story or anything like that, but she talks about the idea of money as an exchange of value, right? And so if you're talking about your debt, right, and you're not losing the money, you're actually exchanging it as, exchanging for an education or exchanging it for a career path or whatever. So, think of it that way can really shift it as well. I mean, I get a lot of flack sometimes because I buy lottery tickets. I don't go crazy and buy one every week or spend hundreds of dollars on it. I think my husband and I maybe buy a $2 lottery ticket every month or so, right? But the value we get from that lottery ticket, it almost gives us permission to talk about like how we're going to help out our family, and then if we realize we actually have money to do it, we actually go and do it. So for some reason, the lottery ticket gives us permission to think about those things, right? So the value that I get from the $2 lottery ticket isn't the potential that I'm going to win the money, which it'd be nice if I, won a couple $100 million, right? But it's more the idea that it gives us time and space for us to think about other people and how we can help them. That's the value I get from the lottery ticket.
That's really so interesting.
Yeah, and it was because I remember, oh my gosh, when I believe it was last year, there's this massive Powerball lottery jackpot. I believe it was like $600 million, something crazy. Don't quote me, but then there were all these blog articles about, oh, you shouldn't be buying this lottery ticket. Like, think about if you invest $2 a week in an IRA, how much it would get you. And I remember just being really angry about it. I'm like, well, I buy lottery tickets. And then I had to really think about why I did it. And so when I came to that conclusion, I'm like, okay, well, $2 isn't the end of the world for me. I can spend that, and that's perfectly okay. And if anybody asks me, I'm just going to tell them, and that's cool.
Another thing that makes you less susceptible to criticism is that if you're living in alignment with your values, it's easier to say, oh, that doesn't work for them because it's not in alignment with what they're trying to do with their life. And this is why it works for me. And I think people get really defensive of their bad behaviors when they know they're bad, right? Like when they know that those behaviors are not ones that they want to continue. And in your case, yeah, $2 isn't going to make or break you. And you know that. And so when people are criticizing you, it's easy for you to turn back and have a response and feel comfortable with where you are. So I really like that. But now I'd like to quickly transition for a minute into just another topic that we both really like to talk about and just touch on the idea of living an authentic life. I know that authenticity has become quite the buzzword lately, but I'd be interested in hearing, what does living authentically mean to you?
Okay, so I like to equate authenticity with the word honesty. And so for me, living an authentic life just means being honest with myself, right? And just making decisions based on how I feel how it will impact me and how it will make me happier as a person, okay? Or things that I feel like I need in order to kind of go where I need to be a happier person. And, and when you're honest with yourself, a lot of what you'll find is that, if something turns out, wrong or not the way you expected, you're at least still happy and at peace with it because you know that you took the time to really dig deep within yourself to figure that out. And that's really what for me, it is.
So it's more than just posting pictures of yourself on Instagram with no makeup.
Yeah. I mean, you can talk about, there's that whole business stuff where you're like, oh, authenticity and branding and transparency and whatever. I won't offer my opinions on that. But if you're talking about your personal life, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole idea of people getting to consumer debt is that whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Because you feel like you have to, appear a certain way or be a certain way, whether or not that's really who you are. And for me, that's really, nutshell, that's really why I got into debt. Like I was in that relationship chasing this idea of a romantic relationship, whatever that was in my mind at the time, right? Or this ideal fantasy of this committed relationship I was in. And I just spent money to really cover that up, that the fact that it wasn't, like I was like, oh, I'll spend money, because I want you to stay with me or whatever. So that's really what I did with that relationship. And when when he finally broke up with me, thank goodness, that was actually a good thing to happen, right? When he finally broke up with me and I finally started realizing like, hey, these are all the qualities I did not want in a person. And if I was honest with myself, I would have known that a long time ago. I would have not been with him and he would have not moved to Australia and none of this would have happened, And so I took that to mean, okay, well, that means whoever is going to come into my life next has to fit all these criteria because these are where my values were aligned.
It's so important to see kind of life's crappier moments, to put it bluntly, as lessons and to really take the lessons from them and move on. And I think often people want to hold on and fix the problem and like, instead of getting out of the relationship, stay in it and fix the relationship so that you didn't have to call it a mistake instead of learning from it and moving on. And I think people do that with their careers. They do that with their financial situations. They do that with so many aspects of their life because they don't want to be seen as having failed or making a bad decision. So instead, they kind of continue to make the bad decision. And it's like life keeps giving you opportunities to learn that lesson. And until you learn it, you're stuck relearning it. So luckily, you said he broke up with you, so you were able to learn that lesson and move on. But until you learned it, you were just going to kind of be stuck in that relationship, or in relationships like that.
Yeah. And it was, it's really funny because I gave myself a year to just, after we broke up, I started just working a job, like odd jobs here and there, and back at the restaurant where I was, when I was putting myself through college. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to give myself this year to do whatever the heck I want. Like, as long as I'm not, doing something illegal or harming anybody, right? I'm going to do whatever I want because I'm going to learn what makes me happy. I'm going to learn to listen to myself and figure out what it is that I value and all that stuff. And so that's what I did, right? And so, I paid off the debt while I did that. And so that paying off the debt really gave me a chance to think about the values and realize like, hey, these are the kind of people I want to hang out with and not. These are the things I want to spend money on and not. And, as if, I don't know if it was God or the universe or whatever, but I paid off the debt. And then a few weeks later, I got an offer to teach in China. And I thought, okay, why the heck not? I'm going to be open to this opportunity. And then as soon as I moved to China, that's when I met my now husband, which was really, yeah. And I remember, oh gosh, this is going to make me sound crazy, but I remember a voice in my head, like when I moved to China, a voice in my head was like, okay, Sarah, you're ready. You're ready for a committed relationship. You know what you want and you're not going to compromise for it. And it was literally the next day when I met him. We were both still jet lagged and he didn't remember who I was and whatever. He claimed his love at first sight, which is not, but yeah, so it was really crazy. It was just, once I figured out myself, right. And all that, like my bank account just started reflecting my self-worth. It sounds really crazy, but when I was really, low and I had low self-esteem, that's when I had that scarcity mindset. I barely had any, money in the bank. I had the debt. And once I became more and more confident in myself and being honest and not being afraid to set those boundaries, now my net worth has, I don't know, I can't do the math right now, but it's high. It's pretty high. Like we've got a sizable, emergency fund. Both my husband and I were debt free when we got married. I'm able to quit my job and transition into freelancing. So, all of those things happen as a result of me just saying like, what is it that I want and how am I going to do it?
Oh my gosh. So you're not going to hear me call you crazy because I love serendipity, and I am definitely somebody who believes in listening to that voice in your head, and that it can show you amazing possibilities if you really learn how to tune into it and figure out what it's trying to say to you. I don't think it is at all crazy that once you kind of ended the relationship and finished paying off the debt, the weight of that relationship opened up space for this new relationship. Ugh, I love that. But I don't actually know how to explain why I believe in these things, but it makes me feel good to believe in them. It makes me feel good to think that the world works in this way in which when you let go of those things that are no longer serving you, you create space in your life for those things that inspire you. And that's what paying off that debt did, Mm-hmm. So for those people who are listening, who have a full-time job, who have, student loan debt, who have responsibilities, who don't have a year to kind of sit with themselves, what are the first steps they could take today towards becoming better at living authentically, being honest with themselves, and figuring out what they like?
You know what? That's a really good question. So I haven't read this book, and I really, really want to read it because apparently my routine is very similar to it. It's called The Miracle Morning.
Mm-hmm. Hal Elrod's book. Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, if you're not a morning person, do this at night. Whatever. Like, I'm not going to judge. I wake up at like 5 a.m. Okay. But give yourself some time. I mean, my morning routines, I'd say maybe 45 minutes, depending on if I do yoga or whenever my son wakes up. But give yourself some time. Start small. If you feel really guilty, maybe give yourself 15 minutes and start doing a routine. So one thing I like to do when I first wake up is, drink a glass of water, and then I open up my 5-minute journal. So it literally lists out like, how are you feeling? So I kind of do an emotional check, like how am I feeling right now? And I write it down, and then write down the 3 things I'm really grateful for. And then I write down like 3 things I would make today awesome. And then at the end of the day, I reflect on what happened that day. So start really small by just actually giving yourself a chance to think of what would make you happy that day or what you would like to happen that day, and then the things that you're grateful for. And it could be anything small. So I like to make it into a game. I try to not name things that I'm, the same things that I'm grateful for like 3 days in a row, because I think then that whole exercise kind of loses its meaning. So I would do things like, I'm really grateful for my hot lemon water today because it's cold, or I'm really grateful for the fact that my son slept in for another hour so I can read a book, things like that. So start small, and then, as you feel, better about kind of reclaiming that time, carve an hour out, or something I would like to do. This is, I haven't discussed with my husband, but maybe even just say, can I just take a day and book a hotel or go to the beach or whatever and just be with myself for the day and do whatever the heck I want. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, right? You can, if you're with, a husband or a partner, whatever, you can always reciprocate that. Say, if I take this day off, can you, why don't you take the day off the next day or something like that? So start doing that, giving yourself the time. And, over time, you'll learn to kind of tune in and listen to those voices, or, talk with God or whoever, be still with the universe or whatever, your intuition, again, whatever. And you'll kind of know then.
It's amazing what a difference a morning routine can make, because especially for young lawyers who are so reactive, I think so many people wake up and the first thing they do is check their phone. And
yeah.
When you check your phone, the first thing you're doing is letting other people dictate what you do with your attention first thing in the morning. So instead of what you're doing, which is really figuring out, how am I going to make today the best day for me? When you check your phone, whether it's push notices from Instagram or Facebook, or it's emails from work or personal email, all of a sudden other people are calling for your attention in all sorts of different directions, and you start your day behind. Because it feels like there's already emails you're supposed to have responded to. There's already posts you're supposed to have read. And the day hasn't even started yet. And already you have no idea what you need out of that day. And you know what 15 other people need from you that day. So I love the morning routine. And I completely agree with you that you should start out small. People get really overwhelmed because they think, I don't have time to, meditate, eat a good breakfast, exercise, and do all these like wonderful, nurturing things. But the reality is if you don't have 5 minutes to spend on yourself, then you need it more than anybody.
Yeah, there's a really great quote, and I wish I know who said it. It was something about meditating. So I remember I was like, oh man, I don't have time to meditate. I have all this stuff to do. And the quote was, if you are too busy to meditate 20 minutes a day, then you need to sit down for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and I was like, when I read that, I'm like, okay, yeah, I have 20 minutes. It's one of those things where, and I think it's true for everybody, especially lawyers, is that, we feel like we're so busy all the time. Right. And I hate that. I really hate that word. I'm trying not to say I'm busy today, because then you feel like you're just out of control. Like, yeah, being busy sounds really glamorous, I guess, in some ways, but it's also saying that you're out of control. Like, you don't have the focus, right? Whatever you need to focus for that day, or the time period. And so get the word busy out. I make sure that I don't even have my phone anywhere near my bedroom, so I don't even see it first thing in the morning.
Good for you.
I do my morning routine now at my dining room table, and sometimes my laptop is there, and then, like, without even thinking, the last couple of days I've done this, without even thinking, I turn it on, and then I'd start checking my email. Yep. And so now I physically put my laptop, I put it under my couch so my son can't grab at it. But so that's what I do. I physically put it somewhere I can't see it. So in the morning, this is a really great tip. So in the morning, wherever you go first thing in the morning, so let's say you go to your, coffee maker or whatever, put your 5-minute journal there, or put whatever it is that you're going to do for your morning routine there. So it's almost a habit. It's like something you do without thinking. So for me, my 5-minute journal now is on my dining room table, because when I wake up, I get my water, I sit down, I literally 5 minutes later, I'm done. I also read a little book, maybe for 10 minutes, and then I'm on with my day. And it makes such a difference. It really does.
Have you read Gretchen Rubin's Better Than Before?
I haven't. That's on my to-read list. Oh my gosh, I have so many that I want to read.
But one of the things she talks about a good way to develop habits is pairing. And that's exactly what you were talking about, is you pair something you want to do with something you already do. So putting your 5-minute journal next to your coffee machine totally makes sense, because I put mine on top of my laptop that's closed. Mm-hmm. So I have to physically move it in order to open my laptop. And that's forces me to do it. And I used to do it when I lived in New York. I used to do it on the subway train because there was nothing else to do. And I didn't have, email or access to social media, because we didn't have Wi-Fi back then on the subway, which we do now. And so it forced me, I would just sit and write on the train. But now that I'm moved to Texas and I don't have that subway time, I've moved to this new routine, and it's really been a lifesaver and got it back into my routine, because I definitely fell off after the move because I didn't have it paired with something else I was already doing, and I didn't know when to build it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I lived in China for 8 years, and then we moved back to the US in June of last year. And it was, I was like, oh, I can totally do this. I've done international moves my whole life. But the whole routine, I mean, it just, it fell by the wayside, because, we had to get stuff out of our storage unit. Then it was in another state. So we drove to another state, my son was there, and I was like, it was nuts. Right. And I remember then that's when I started freaking out about money again. And it was completely unfounded. And we set aside money to buy furniture and all that. So it wasn't like we were going into debt or anything over this move. And I realized, okay, well, you know what, Sarah, these are clearly purchases that you need. Like, you kind of need a bed for your son. He's not going to be sleeping on the floor, or, you do need, shelving units for your closet. That's a need. So why are you freaking out? You're not impulse purchasing. And then I realized, like, oh, I don't have my routines. I haven't had time to sit still and listen or do those things. And so that's why I'm really adamant, and I'm forcing myself to, no matter where I go, even if it's vacation, that I bring something with me that reminds me of my routine. And so a 5-minute journal is really good. It's portable. You can even bring, let's say you drink, your favorite cup of tea, like bring the tea bags that you drink from home. So wherever you are in the world, you can always brew a cup of tea. That really helps me as well.
Those are great tips. And I think that's something that's often lost for people, is that even if you're making good decisions, if you aren't doing them intentionally and kind of within a framework of choice, they can still feel bad, So even though you had saved money and even though you knew you needed to buy, you were just kind of out of whack. And so nothing felt good.
Yeah. I mean, if there's nothing that, listeners take away from our conversation, I want them to know, like, get yourself time, give yourself time. Like, I don't care if it's 10 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, give yourself that time every day to do something that will make you happy, and allow yourself that time to really explore what it is that you enjoy. And it could be something, everyone thinks it's cuckoo, whatever, who cares? It's your time.
Yep.
And if you give yourself that space, you're going to see that translate a lot more into your life. So, for example, I remember giving myself these guidelines with friends when I stopped spending so much money, was I would refuse to go to restaurants. But if the same friend asked me to go on a, coffee run, then I would say yes. And so I started giving myself really weird rules. And every morning I remember thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to enforce because I'm going to see this friend or whatever. And then I realized, like, wow, this is making me happier and I'm spending less,
Yep.
And no one said anything. Like, I was really definitely afraid I was going to lose people as a result of me saying no to going to restaurants. But they were like, no, we just wanted to spend time with you, and going out to coffee is perfectly fine. Yeah. And if it wasn't for giving myself, those 15 minutes a day or whatever it was back then, I would have never learned that.
And especially for those people, and I know there's a lot of them out there who say to me that they have no idea what they want to be doing with their life. Like, this is all, well and good, but they don't know how to be intentional, and they don't know how to move towards that direction because they have no idea what that direction is. That's what this space gives you. This space gives you that time to figure that out. It gives you the quiet that you need to kind of start listening to yourself and to start noticing things that you like, noticing things that make you happy, noticing what directions are most exciting to you. And if you give yourself the space consistently, it becomes easier to see those things in your life. So,
yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not that you don't know what you want, it's that you haven't given yourself the time to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. But so you've mentioned The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. You've mentioned the 5-minute journal. Are there any other resources that you've turned to that you would recommend to others? I
really love the Dalai Lama books. That was really what, I don't want to say saved me, but it really was one of the Art of Happiness was one of the first books I read after the breakup. It was, I remember, I felt so low. I was sitting in the bedroom that hadn't changed since I was in high school. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And then I read it. Yeah. I really was like, I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
And I read it, and it just, like, I cried. Like, I don't cry over books. I get really emotional over them, but this book, I was crying tears. It was ugly tears, like, and then, so for me, I realized, like, and I think that was one of the points where I realized, okay, I was chasing a fantasy and I was burying my head in the sand, and I need to get my head out of the sand if I really wanted to, be happy. And it was one of those, I also realized too, with reading that book, was that deep down I knew the answers to what I wanted, but I was scared to admit them because I didn't know what the next step was. That was what it was. I didn't trust myself to go to the next step. And, whatever books you can read that can help you develop that trust. I know, a lot of my friends read the Bible. I read like meditation books and things like that. That really helps me. So if there's any books that really call out to you and say, and help you just to say, like, hey, Sarah or Bob, whatever, like, you can trust yourself, take the next step. It doesn't have to be a decision that you make for the next 10 years. It's just literally a decision that you make towards the next step. And then once you get there, you make another step. And so that's really what I did, right? Because when I felt really upset about the debt and everything, I remember, okay, immediately my next step was walk 10 minutes down to the mall I used to work at and get a job. And that's what I did. And then that led me to a teaching job in South Korea. And then the job in South Korea led me to the job in China. And that led me to marrying my husband and starting a family and all that fun stuff, So just that one little step really took me there. And reading the Dalai Lama really helped me figure that out.
That book is on my list for this year, so I'm very excited. It's been so good to have you on. What's the best way for people to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, definitely over at my website at highfivingdollars.com. And if you're interested in really exploring, your relationship with money, I've got 2 things over there you can grab. One is a quiz to assess your current relationship with money, and the other one is a 5-part course called Money Relationship Rescue. So it goes through the actual 5 steps that I took over the last 10 years to really get a better handle on my money relationship.
Great. I will include links to both of those in the show notes for people so they can access that through my website at thehappylawyerproject.com. And my very last question for you today, what do you think separates those who find happiness in life from those who stay stuck wishing for a happier tomorrow?
I think ultimately is claiming responsibility for their decisions. And that's really what it is. It's ultimately feeling like whatever decisions you make is something that you did, not somebody else did for you.
It's a great advice, and I haven't heard that one yet, but I think it's so true. So thank you so much, Sarah, for all that you do to help people fall back in love with their money and for sharing that message with my audience here today.
All right. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at Okema, OKEOMA, at thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye!